right, team. Welcome to the Keeping It Real podcast. And today's conversation is with John Abramson. He is a Harvard Medical School professional and a national drug litigation expert. And we're talking about his new book, Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke Healthcare and What We Can Do About It. I think the subtitle really says it all. We've talked about big pharma many times on the show. I've written about its impacts across all areas of health and wellness in many of my books. And now we have an expert on to talk about the ways in which big pharma impacts our healthcare and our health across the board. So I'm not going to continue rambling. I'm going to bring John right on. I hope you love the show. All right, guys, we are back with John Abramson, and we're talking about his new book, Sickening. John, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jillian. It's a pleasure.
Wow, man, what a book. We're going to jump right in on this one. I don't want to lose a second with you here. First question about you is, you lecture at Harvard, right? You're a drug litigation specialist. How does one even get into this field?
Well, it happened organically. I graduated from college in 1970. It was a turbulent time in the United States. Yeah. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I thought I might want to be a writer, but I didn't have anything to say. So after
you sure found something to say, huh? I'll say that.
Right, exactly. In any event, I ended up in medical school. With the idea of becoming a family doctor and just taking care of people. And at the end of my residency, I was in the public health service in the middle of my training and spent a couple of years in Appalachia taking care of people. Came back to finish my residency and was offered a fellowship, a Robert Wood Johnson fellowship in family medicine. And wow. In that fellowship, Robert Wood Johnson paid for 2 years of study about epidemiology, statistics, and research design. And I decided I just wanted to go take care of people. That was my initial goal, and that's what I would do. So I had these skills that I acquired in my fellowship, but went out to practice in a small town about an hour north of Boston and was quite happy and felt that family medicine was my calling. And I made house calls and took care of people. And as the 90s wore on, it became increasingly clear that commercial interests were playing a growing role in the articles that were being published in even the best journals. And that this was diverting the way we doctors were expected to practice medicine towards new medicines and expensive therapies, and the kinds of care that family practitioners in particular understand about a holistic approach to health and helping people learn how to take care of themselves and making sure that we can assist families in getting along. The kinds of grounded healthcare were being pushed aside by this commercialism. And then finally, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was the arthritis drug Vioxx. I don't know if you remember that. It was...
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so there was an arthritis drug called Vioxx that came out in 1999. It provided no better relief for arthritis or pain than older over-the-counter anti-inflammatory drugs like naproxen or Aleve or Advil. But it was supposed to be gentler on the stomach. And that it was supposed to be gentler on the stomach became the single marketing claim that upon which $2 billion of Vioxx were being prescribed each year. But the short of the story is the article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that supposedly showed that Vioxx was a safer drug because it caused fewer serious GI complications actually more than doubled the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots. And it was clearly a dangerous drug. But doctors didn't know it because the New England Journal had published this article that had been submitted by Merck. And the claim was that it was safer on the stomach. The bottom line is that 40 to 60,000 Americans died from taking Vioxx The only benefit of which for almost all the people who took it was Merck's profit. And as that story was unfolding, I was a family doc, but I said, that's it. I've got to figure out what's going on here. The doctors are being misled by their most trusted sources of information. And I'm going to leave medical practice and I'm going to figure out what's going on and write a book. And that book was Overdosed America. It came out in 2004. And I was very fortunate that Vioxx got pulled 1 week after my book came out. It wasn't because of my book, or it wasn't directly because of my book. A second study showed that Vioxx doubled the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots. And Merck knew they had hidden the first study, the cardiovascular results of the first study, so they knew they had to pull the drug. And that was the biggest drug recall in U.S. history. And at that point, I was the guy who wrote the last book, and I was on the Today Show, and all over TV and radio and so forth. And to continue the story, plaintiff's attorneys saw me on TV talking about science and speaking English, and they asked me if I would participate as an expert in litigation in these national lawsuits with thousands, tens of thousands of plaintiffs, like the Vioxx litigation. Right. And I spent about 10 years full time in litigation, which meant I was inside the corporate computers. The corporate hard drives had been delivered to the plaintiff's attorneys, and I signed a confidentiality agreement. And I was inside the computers, and I could ask any questions, query the computers in any way that I wanted to, and come up with theories about test theories about how it was decided to misrepresent the data in the way that it was misrepresented.
God. Okay. I want to start from the very beginning, right? I'm the average person listening to this, and you know the rule, right? Which is what your book is all about. If you're going to present a problem, we got to present a solution, which I know the book does. I want to further understand the problem. So, big pharma owns big food, and big food makes you sick, and then they treat you with their drugs. And I think people get so scared and so overwhelmed. They don't know which way to turn. And it's like, well, if I can't take medicine recommended by my doctor, then am I going to die? Who can I trust? And they just feel so panicked. I myself don't really understand. And of course, I realize it's about money, right? And I even remember, and I would love your feedback on this one, reading about hormone replacement therapy and the fact that the drug companies went, well, how do we create, hold on a second, half the population is going to go into menopause, and it all of a sudden becomes a condition, despite the fact that women throughout history have been going through menopause. But now it's a health issue. And they had Lauren Hutton talking about it at the time and got women on all these hormones. And they created this disease out of something totally natural that's actually designed to keep you around longer, and had women on drugs. That I get. That's so obvious, right? It's so clear. It's like easy money. But beyond that, why not just create an arthritis drug that works? Why all of this nefarious behavior? What can you trust? What is the true motive for this type of deception? Is it just money? I don't even understand it myself.
We can talk about hormone replacement if you'd like. There's a whole chapter about hormone replacement and how doctors and women got fooled in Overdosed America. That was the issue at the time in the early.
I think 2000s. I read it in your book. It was your book. Yeah. I'm so sorry. It was such a long time ago. I remember reading it, and it was obviously your book, and it stuck with me. Yeah. And I'm sorry, please continue. Okay, go ahead.
So in that story, they paid a physician who was of some repute, and he wrote articles and explained, you're saying, why were women vulnerable to making menopause a disease? And he wrote this book called, I think, Feminine Forever, and said that women's sexual organs will shrivel up. Yes. And they'll be unattractive, and they'll be hard to live with if they don't take hormones. But if they take hormones, they'll be like young forever, beautiful young ladies, and
your husband will still want you. Yep,
forever. And it's a complicated story about why the doctors got confused about this, because what happened is women who were going to be healthy anyway wanted were attracted to the idea that taking hormones would be good for their health. So they kind of fell into the trap. So that if you did a study, observational studies that were done at Harvard, showed that the women who took hormones were healthier. But the catch is they were going to be healthier anyway. And the hormones didn't make them sick enough to overcome their predisposition towards health. So part of that was an honest mistake, and part of that was marketing. But that gets us into the more important question about why is this going on? Why would Vioxx become...
just create a healthier drug. I don't understand.
Right.
Like, John, why not create antivirals for COVID? Why just vaccine and after vaccine, after vaccine, after vaccine? When people say you can create antivirals, like, why do some things have a vaccine, but some things don't? Like, you can create an HPV vaccine, but not a herpes vaccine. Like, why not just do the right thing? Isn't there enough money there? I actually don't understand.
Right. So we say drug companies are greedy. That's like complaining that zebras have stripes. Their job is to make money.
Right.
Now, how they make money is that their research grows towards the things that are going to be profitable. In other words, they don't get any money if they study whether you should take Advil 2 times or 3 times or 4 times a day. Nobody's going to make any money because that's available as a generic drug. So if they want to make money on arthritis, they've got to come up with a new shtick. And the shtick with Vioxx was 16,000 people a year are dying from GI complications, and we can fix that.
Wow.
Well, it turned out they couldn't even fix it. In one of the last litigations, I requested the real data from the drug company that the FDA hadn't requested, and it showed that it didn't even reduce the risk of serious GI complications if you weren't taking steroids for your arthritis and Vioxx, which very few people are. So the answer to the question is that the drug companies are looking to maximize their profits, to maximize their return to their investors. That's their job. It's not to make us healthy. It's not to make good drugs. It's to maximize the return on investment to their investors. And they will produce drugs that will get them in that direction. So you say, why are there vaccines for some things and not others? Because they can make money on those things.
That's okay. So I was like, am I a conspiracy theorist in thinking about, well, herpes medication is insanely expensive. Why create a vaccine for that when we can make so much money? Or, am I, HIV? Well, the drugs for HIV are insanely expensive. Like, you can't come up with a vaccine for HIV.
I think that,
or am I going down the rabbit hole? That's like, because you start to hear it and you don't know where it stops.
Yeah, I think you're on the edge of the rabbit hole, and that's
okay. That's fair. Okay,
that's really the message that I want to get across: is that the pharmaceutical industry has a monopoly on delivering the benefits of medical science to the public. If they're going to get benefits from new therapeutics, it's going to come through the pharmaceutical industry. And they're going to do that when it makes money. Now, if there could be a vaccine that was effective for herpes or for AIDS, HIV, a company would do that. An independent company could make money doing that. It would cost the people who are making the brand name HIV drugs a lot of money, but they don't act as a brotherhood. They're all in it to maximize their own silo of money.
I understand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This virtuous cycle in my mind on their behalf, again, like, am I full-blown Joe Rogan, kind of like down the rabbit hole with regard to thinking? Don't
trash Joe Rogan. He's a
I love Rogan. No. Don't get me wrong. I love Rogan, but he will go all the way there. I watch him all the time. That's why I say, am I going like all the way in? In that, do they own certain aspects of big food? Are they invested in making the population unhealthy in order to be profitable? Or am I, once again, like right on the edge of...
Almost. You're on the right track. They're not invested in 40% of Americans are obese, way more than any other wealthy country.
Right. Exactly.
2030, it's going to be 50% of Americans are going to be obese. So big food is making their money and serving up very calorie dense, tasty foods, tasty meaning sugar, salt, and fat. But Big Pharma is not in cahoots with the food industry, but what they're doing is they're sucking away so much money from healthcare that we can't get to the right issues. And let me be specific. This is I have a whole chapter in Sickening about insulin. 80% of the insulin that's used in the United States is used by people with type 2 diabetes.
Right.
Type 1 diabetics need insulin. They'll die without insulin. Type 2 diabetics generally don't need insulin that much, but because there's so many more type 2 diabetics, the 25% of type 2 diabetics who need insulin constitute 80% of the people who are using insulin. Now, we have the latest generation of insulins. It's called insulin analogs. They cost around, when I last looked at the calculation, they cost around $5,200 a year for insulin analogs for people with type 2 diabetes. The previous generation of genetically engineered insulin, human recombinant insulin that came out in 1982, cost about $480. So that insulin analogs cost 11 times more than the human recombinant insulin. Jeez. The point I want to make here is that there is not evidence to show that the insulin analogs are superior for people with type 2 diabetes. So we're wasting $20 billion a year prescribing insulin analogs to type 2 diabetics when they could do very as well or sometimes even better with human recombinant insulin. And that $20 billion could be used to have a diabetes prevention program in every community in the United States. And you could prevent somewhere around half of the people at risk of getting type 2 diabetes from actually getting the disease. So the money, it's not a conspiracy to make people diabetic. It's not a conspiracy to make them obese. It's just their job is to suck away as much money as they can from American society. And that's the collateral damage.
I see. Can you elaborate a bit on the manipulation of different studies? Because I see it with food, right? Like, oh, chocolate milk is the most amazing recovery drink. I'm like, no, that's not true. That was funded by the Milk Association of whatever. Could you explain like how they're getting away with that, how these things are manipulated? Because people think, well, there's a study. As the study says, and they don't understand how it flies.
That's you're spot on. The story is that over the past 20 or 30 years, the drug industry has taken over control of the research. So they fund about 86% of clinical trials. But more importantly, they control the design of the research. They control who's in it. They control the doses. They own the data from their clinical trials. They own the data. Often authors of clinical trials aren't allowed to see those trials, see the data. So what happens is that peer reviewers, our whole system is based on evidence-based medicine. Doctors read their journals, and if it's a peer-reviewed article in a respectable journal, that is the gospel truth. What people don't know, and this will be news on your podcast, what people don't know is that the peer reviewers don't have access to the data.
Oh my God.
They just have access. When an article is published in a journal, the clinical trial results are written up, usually in conjunction with the manufacturer, not always, but usually. And they interpret the data and they put in short data tables in the article, and they send it to the journal for peer review, and no other data is available. So when I was in litigation, I could see the data. I could see where the discrepancies were between the real data and what had been submitted and published in journals. But the peer reviewers who are supposed to be protecting the public, who are supposed to be vetting these manuscripts to make sure that they're providing an accurate and reasonably complete version of the truth, they can't do that. There's no way they can do that. And yet they're they're allowing themselves to be used so that the journal and the pharmaceutical industry can say that the data has been vetted.
Oh my God. All for money. I'm guessing, obviously, right? It's like, we're going to pay
It's all,
you.
yeah, it's always to maximize the return on investment for the pharmaceutical company's investors. It could be stocks, it can be venture capital, hedge funds, whatever. And then that creates this system that's driven by its own parochial interests, be it academic medical centers wanting to make money doing the research, or academic researchers wanting to gain prestige and therefore make money. The journals make money. We can talk about that. The professional societies make money. The nonprofit organizations.
So I kind of wanted to get, because I'm going to make the whole, for everybody listening who's like, holy shit, I don't know where to turn. I want to do the whole third segment on what we can do about it, which is exactly what your book is about. But I would love for you to explain how the journals make money, because everyone's thinking, well, why is everyone complicit, right? Like,
right.
Why how come they're the peer research? Why are they putting their name on the study? Why is this being printed in the journal? How come the doctors are selling me that drug? Why is everybody complicit?
Right. And the last chapter before I get to solutions is sickening, puts all this together. Right. And it shows, for example, with the journals, Richard Smith was an editor at British Medical Journal for 25 years. And when he stepped down, he wrote this article and he said, I can't believe that I didn't see what was going on between the journals and the drug companies. And what Dr. Smith wrote is that journals make a lot of money selling reprints of the articles they publish back to the pharmaceutical companies, who then hand those articles, the drug reps hand those articles out to the doctors. And it says, this thing is the greatest invention since whipped cream. So the journals make money selling reprints. In, I forget what year it was, 2011 or some year like that. The Lancet, which is one of the most prominent journals in the world, made 41% of its income from reprints.
Selling their journals back to the drug company
to the
hand
drug
out
company
as proof that their product works.
Exactly.
I had no idea. No idea.
Yeah, I had no idea before I read Dr. Smith's article. And the New England Journal is probably more, but they won't give out the numbers. So a significant portion of the journal's income, the major journal's income, comes from selling these reprints back to the drug companies. Well, if the journals are real critical of the articles that are submitted to them,
they're not going to buy. Of course. Why would they want to buy the article and say, hey, read this article about how our product doesn't work? Or if it's not in there at all. Yeah, I get it. Now,
the key issue here for doctors and for consumers listening is that because a significant portion of the journal's income comes from selling these articles back, that creates a tremendous disincentive to the journals to say, we're not going to publish your articles. We're not going to say your articles are peer reviewed unless our peer reviewers get the actual data. It's a very simple thing to get the data to the peer reviewers, but it doesn't happen.
Okay. What about lobbying and getting the whole system, all of the politicians? How are they impacting our healthcare that way with their lobbying?
Yeah, lobbying is enormous. The pharmaceutical industry has spent 50% more than the next highest industry lobbying since 1998. So what happens with this lobbying and with campaign contributions is they're very bipartisan in the money they hand out. It goes to Republicans and it goes to Democrats. Because Democrats control government right now, I think 53% of their money has recently gone to Democrats and 47% to Republicans. But when we wonder, when 80%, more than 80% of Americans think that Medicare should be able to negotiate drug prices and our government can't get it done, and you say, why can't our government get it done when 80% of Americans want it done? And in fact, Democrats control all three branches of government. And the answer is that there's money going everywhere. Everywhere.
Wow. I did not realize that either. I knew that they impacted laws. around healthcare insurance, but I didn't realize how vast and wide reaching their grip was. Last one here before I take a break, because I know Cindy's got to be ready to kill me. Why are the doctors on board? Why would they prescribe Vioxx? Is it because they're reading the studies, or because the drug rep goes out and has a hold of them too, or because doctors are mostly great people, in my opinion, and they go into the world to save lives. So and they're the most intelligent among us. So how are they getting duped into this?
Right. That's the question. And the answer is that you need to kind of go up a level to understand that, and use the concept of paradigms that Thomas Kuhn was a philosopher of science, wrote this book in 1962, a geeky book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And what he showed is that groups of scientists, including doctors, learn the boundaries of legitimate inquiry within their field. And as they become recognized as experts in their field, they have to adhere to those rules of legitimacy. So in medicine, what Kuhn is saying back in 1962 is the air quotes knowledge that experts rely on is more as a process of sociology than scientific objectivity. Now, with that as a background, the paradigm of medicine is that good doctors practice evidence-based medicine. You would have to look very far to find a doctor who disagreed with that statement. Good doctors practice evidence-based medicine. But evidence-based medicine now imposes an epistemological blind spot in doctors not to understand that the process of peer review is a sham. They don't understand that. The doctors who are watching your podcast right now are going to be saying, this guy can't be right. It can't possibly be right that we're getting duped into thinking peer review looks at the data and verifies the accuracy of the data. And this is a message that we've got to get out. Doctors, when we talk about solutions in the next segment, one of the big solutions is to help doctors to understand this is going on so they can reach into their integrity and their respect and commitment to their patients so that we do get good data to doctors. But doctors need to demand that so they can practice.
I want to go just a bit further. I'm so sorry, but I'm not ready to move on yet. When I thought I was, John, but I'm not. When I received the book from your team, it obviously came with speaking points, right? Which, I've incorporated all of my own questions for you, but this was fascinating. So as COVID-19 vaccines became more readily available earlier this year, social media was flooded with what was effectively free marketing for the manufacturers. But a look behind the curtain shows how these companies exploited the public's desperation and hope to maximize their opportunity to profit off the pandemic. In Sickening, Abramson lays out the decades-long stranglehold that Big Pharma has on the American healthcare system long before COVID-19, and how the industry manipulates research, dupes doctors, ultimately makes us all sicker. With his never-before-reported scoops, the rosy reputations of Pfizer and Moderna cultivated in 2021 won't last long. I bring this up only because we've touched on everything in here clearly, but you mentioned the COVID-19 vaccines. Do you believe that there's something shady going on there? Because I've had virologists on, I've had people that have worked on the vaccines on, and they're like, guys, you're going crazy. You're nuts. This is, this technology's been around for 30 years. Is this something we can feel safe about? Is this off the table, or do you not think so?
The COVID-19 vaccines are a perfect example of how the pharmaceutical industry operates at its best.
Okay.
At its best. They took research that was done primarily by the NIH and turned it into effective vaccines. The vaccines probably aren't perfect, but they are effective. And being a physician, you know that you got to make decisions on imperfect information, that
Right.
there are people at risk, and you got to kind of guess what the future is going to look like. You ought to be honest about it, but you got to guess about it. But here's the problem, Jillian. Remember that the pharmaceutical industry's primary job is to maximize the profits for their investors. So they take the NIH's technology and they make these vaccines, which really work well. And if there are any adults out there, especially kids, I believe too, but adults out there who are not vaccinated, I plead with you to get vaccinated. It's a huge mistake not to be vaccinated. That said, what happened is the companies that developed the new vaccines sold virtually all of their vaccines to first world countries because they could make more money. They're just going to sell their vaccines where they make the most money. That's their job. And until somebody makes them stop doing it, they're going to do it. So in this case, they sell their vaccines to the first world, and the third world, the underdeveloped countries, aren't getting vaccinated. So even now, the World Health Organization had a goal of all nations having 40% vaccination rates. Africa has a 9% vaccination rate. Now, this, on the surface, this is an issue of social justice. And some people will say, hey, I really don't care about them. I care about my family. But here's the problem. This point is critical because in this instance, with this disease, not vaccinating the third world means these variants are going to come back and bite us in the butt, and we're going to keep getting COVID in the first world. So they're making these fabulous vaccines that are very effective to date, thank God, but they're not protecting us from the source of the variants that are going to affect us later on. They don't care about that. They're just going to grab their money. And when we get to solutions, keep this.
Well, this is the perfect segue. Keep going. Yeah. Because here's the issue is that then you now have all of this distrust. So then now we have a huge problem because nobody knows who to trust and when it's safe, right? When it's safe, when you need it, when it's not safe.
Of the new drugs that are actually new chemicals, not just reformulations or extended release, but about 30 new drugs get approved every year, new molecular entities, they're called. About 1/4 of those new drugs provide genuinely previously unavailable benefit. 1/4 of the new drugs. The problem is
the other 75%.
Yeah, and we can't tell which ones they are. And therein lies a big part of the solution.
Well, that better be in your book, boss. So we're going to come back and you're going to tell me exactly that. So we will be right back with John Abramson talking about his new book, Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. All right, guys, we are back with John Abramson. We're talking about his new book, Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. And that's exactly what we're going to jump into, how we can repair it. So, John, let's start with the second half of your book. And I get it. Everyone needs to get the book. But can you highlight what you talk about in the book so people know what to expect and feel hopeful that there's a solution here?
Yes, there are solutions. There's no question that there are solutions. And they're pretty simple. The problem is a political problem. So in broad brushstrokes, there needs to be a political will to find the solutions. And let me just, continuing on from the last segment, that 25% of new drugs are really offer really previously unavailable benefits. 75% don't. The problem, the reason why the United States has gone so far off course is because of the way our healthcare system is structured and the way information gets to doctors in the United States is very much different from the other countries. So just in broad brushstrokes, our healthcare system is not functioning very well. The healthy life expectancy is probably the best measure of the health of a population, how many years people live in good health, and bad health is prorated for quality of life. In 2000, we ranked 38th in the world in healthy life expectancy. Since 2000, we have spent more and more in excess of the other wealthy countries. So at this point, we now spend about 7% more than the average of the other wealthy countries, 7% more of our GDP, the average of the other wealthy countries. That translates into $1.5 trillion a year excess in healthcare. which is getting sucked out of our society so that we can't address the social determinants of health, which really account for about 80% of our health.
Yeah. You can't talk about that at all. All of the obesity is now a third rail conversation in America. It's
exactly.
like, God forbid you put someone's feelings, behind the truth. You could be canceled.
But here's the situation, Jillian.
Yeah.
We're spending $1.5 trillion a year extra beyond what the other countries are spending. But the health of Americans is so inferior that 1,300 Americans are dying every day because our health and healthcare is inferior. So we're having like a 9/11 tragedy every 2.5 days in the United States.
What do you mean? Because they're getting bad drugs, wrong drugs, because their health becomes bad? Like, what's the mechanism of that 1,300?
Because the healthcare system isn't preventing preventable deaths, and because the healthcare system is sucking so much money away from this addressing the social determinants of health.
I see.
That we fail on both
prevention.
Sides.
Right.
Yeah.
I got it.
So we're failing on both sides. So what do we do? Number one, the United States, you brought up the issue before of almost all doctors are trying their best to help their patients. The problem is that they don't have good information and they don't know it. So number one is we've got to get the message out that you don't know what the data are unless you have access to the data. And all the other countries have a mechanism for doing what's called health technology assessment. So an unbiased party, usually quasi-governmental, but it doesn't have to be quasi-governmental, looks at all the data that's available and formulates a report about which drugs are of medical value and which new drugs are of economic value. We don't have that in the United States. So we don't have a mechanism for providing that information to doctors. And not only do we not have it, it's against the law for the federal government to do cost effectiveness research on new drugs. It's against the law, and it's against the law for any federal program to integrate cost effectiveness of new therapies into treatment recommendations. So doctors can't get the information they need. And for you docs and other healthcare professionals out there, please, it's a crisis. We healthcare professionals have got to demand that we have access to the real data about what's going to be in our patient's best interest. And Jillian, it's so bizarrely pro-pharma and anti-patient that in our clinical guidelines are written by experts, and they set the standards. Clinical practice guidelines set the standards for good care. The people who write those clinical practice guidelines do not have access to the real data.
Oh my God, I don't understand how this isn't illegal. It's crazy to me. Like, don't get me wrong. I love my country. I'm so grateful to be living here. And I know all the privileges that I have as an American. But when you look at the lobbying that goes on, that's illegal in most countries, or the way that you're telling me that this is structured in other countries, the fact that it doesn't happen here that way is criminal. Absolutely criminal. It's outrageous.
Yes. And it goes back to the question you asked about lobbying. All that money that's being spent is to prevent people from understanding it, prevent legislators from understanding it, prevent doctors, prevent consumers, prevent business purchasers, to prevent everybody from understanding, A, how dysfunctional our healthcare system is, how many extra Americans are dying every day, how much we're wasting, and then to cover up this informational takeover by the commercial interests.
My God. So you need reform on the laws then, essentially, correct? Like you couldn't even file a lawsuit about it because the law currently says it's illegal to have this kind of access. So somebody would have to reform policy.
Well,
for somebody.
It's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. The solutions aren't complicated. There's an organization called the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. It's 13 of the most prominent general medical journals in the world.
Right.
And if they simply said, we won't publish articles unless you provide us with the data before publication, there's some talk about providing data after publication. That's nonsense. Once an article's published and doctors learn what they should believe about something, it's very hard to undo that. But if the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors just simply took a stand and said, look, we understand that one or two journals can't do this. It will not be in their financial interest, and it will put them at a competitive disadvantage. But we are going to insist that all of our member journals, and recommend that all journals in the world, take this new stance toward access to data. You could fix it in a day.
What can we do about it? Right. I'm not a doctor. I don't run a journal. Is there do we have a petition? Is there a way to speak? Because you obviously can't do your own research. Because my number one thing is, well, be proactive, do your own homework. But if I do my own homework and I take the study to my doctor who goes, oh, looks good.
Yep.
I mean, because I do my own homework and it's like the homework is totally invalid.
That's correct. And so is the doctor's homework. So what people can do about this little part of the problem is to share it with their doctors. To say to your doctor, did you know that peer reviewers don't have access to the data? And the doctor will say, you're crazy. Of course they do. And they can show them my book. It's sort of a cheap plug, but
no. Well, I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
One of the first thing we can do is get the book and read the book, and
get the book in their doctor's hands. That's the key to this part of the problem.
John, I have another question about this, and this might be slightly off topic, but I've heard many different people actually die from mistakes with the wrong medication, too much medication, on top of being given the medication they think is right. How can we protect ourselves so we can read the book, we can know what to look out for, and we can know how to tell the people looking out for us what to look out for? That's probably the best thing, I'm guessing.
Yeah, yes, but that's not adequate. A professor at Harvard Medical School, a colleague, tells his residents that don't prescribe a new drug for your patients until the drug's been out for a year, meaning there'll be enough safety data accumulated. But then he adds, if the patient's in your family, wait 5 years.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Wow.
So,
and that's the adverse reporting.
Right.
Okay. Could you explain that? I'm so sorry.
Yes,
could you explain what that is, John?
Yes. So all drugs, the best drugs, have side effects. Drugs have to have side effects. They can't work positively without having side effects. And the question is the question for the FDA and the question for an individual doctor with an individual patient, is it more likely to help my patient than harm my patient? Yeah, hurt them. And the drug company does the research on the drugs. They're not trying to find adverse events.
Oh, of course.
So it can be slow for the adverse events to show up in the initial clinical trials. Then there's adverse event reporting that goes to the FDA. Unfortunately, that's notoriously inaccurate because it's voluntary. It takes effort to do that. So the adverse event reporting tends to be inadequate. Some countries do a better job than we do of collecting. This is a good problem for electronic medical records. It's pretty easy to look at a database of millions of patients and see who was started on new drug XYZ and see just very grossly, is the rate of hospitalization greater in patients who were started on XYZ or in patients who weren't, who have the same condition. That doesn't prove that there's a problem, because maybe sicker patients, it's sort of the reverse of the hormone replacement story. Maybe sicker patients were started on a new drug because let's try
there
something.
Was more, right, less to lose, right, more to gain. I understand. I get you.
Precisely. But it rings an alarm bell so that you can start to look at it. But we do need better systems for looking at adverse events. No question about that. But this broader issue of the drug companies and commercial interests determining what doctors' new knowledge is about is a key problem that doesn't get discussed. So 96% of clinical research is about new drugs and medical devices, not about how to make people healthier. About 2% is how to make people healthier, and 96% is trying to create evidence to get doctors to prescribe and patients to use the most expensive new medicines. So in a rational system, we talked about we need health technology assessment. So there's an easy way to get a thorough investigation into doctors' hands to show the doctors whether a new drug is actually beneficial and whether it is worth the money it's costing. We also need oversight to balance our research agenda. If 80 or 90% of our health is determined by how we live our lives, and 96% of the new knowledge that doctors are getting is about drugs and devices, we're going to get the mess we've got.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. John, you're fantastic. I could literally talk to you for hours. But you wrote a whole book, thank goodness, that guys, I cannot recommend more emphatically that you get this book. I think that this will impact your health so tremendously at one point down the road, or the health of a loved one, somebody in your family. Having the knowledge is being prepared, is being empowered, is knowing how to be proactive in the most powerful ways when you are the underdog, right? This is the only way to fight back, is to have the tools and have the knowledge. The book is called Sickening: How Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Repair It. It's out tomorrow. Everywhere, John? Everywhere.
Everywhere.
And
yes.
Boss, is there, can we go to an Instagram? Is there a website? Like, where can we go more to like hear you speak, ask questions?
I'm embarrassed to say, Jillian, I haven't done that. It's just takes all my bandwidth to figure this stuff out and to stay current with it. And I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk. So this is really what I'm doing to get the word out, is talking with you and other folks.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do my absolute best to get this out there, because it is so important that we all know. And again, thank you so much for coming on. You're really an amazing, amazing guy. And thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you for a wonderful interview and for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.